You all are here for closing the pay gap for workers with disabilities. If not, just count yourself lucky. You stumbled into the right place to be at the right time. This promises to be a very informative session. I am Dwayne Norris. I'm the Senior Vice President and Director of the American Institutes for Research's Workforce and Lifelong Learning program. The American Institutes for Research, or AIR, is proud to sponsor this event. Our mission is to conduct and apply the best behavioral and social science research and evaluation toward improving people's lives, with a special emphasis on disadvantage. And our continuous efforts to live into this mission is why we have created a practice area devoted to disability research. It's so we can harness resources and produce evidence that informs policy and practices that even the playing field for individuals with disabilities. And that's in work and in life in general. And today you will, of course, hear about some of our work and others in this field. As we proceed, I want to encourage you, as I've been instructed to do, to stay connected with us via social media, if that is your thing, right up there. I guess our Twitter information you need. So let's get started. In addition to welcoming you, I have the honor of introducing the moderator of the session, Jill Houghton, the Executive Director of the U.S. Business Leadership Network. And she asked me to just be brief, but I'll do my best. Jill has spent her career literally on the front lines seeking to even up the uneven playing field. Her creative spirit and passionate approach to the inclusion of people with disability comes from her core. While pursuing her bachelor's degree from University of Kansas, I'm a basketball fan. She interned with Senator Dole, and the experience as well as her challenges associated with having a learning disability ignited the direction of her professional aspirations, leading to more than 2 decades of diverse leadership at the federal, state, and local levels, working with businesses to advance the workplace inclusion of persons with disabilities. In 2008, she was invited to help build the U.S. Business Leadership Network, which, as you probably know, a national nonprofit, nonpartisan business-to-business network that helps businesses drive performance by leveraging diversity inclusion in the workplace, supply chain, and marketplace. Under Jill's leadership, the USBLN serves as the collective voice of nearly 50 business leadership network affiliates across the United States, representing more than 5,000 businesses. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jill. Welcome and enjoy.
Thank you, and welcome today. We're going to have an exciting panel on a very important topic, so don't forget hashtag earnings disparity. I am Jill Houghton and lead the U.S. Business Leadership Network and represent businesses who are really committed to including people with disabilities in the workplace, in the supply chain as disability-owned businesses, and in the marketplace, marketing to people with disabilities as customers. And this issue of wage disparity is an important issue to us. I can tell you that many of our members are on a journey. You never really get there. Everybody's at a different stage in this journey and are really focused on building inclusive cultures, right? Because we want to create inclusive cultures in corporate America where people can bring their whole self to work, where they can feel safe to identify as being a person with a disability. And this issue around wage disparities is a complicated one. with many layers, right? It's kind of like an onion, and maybe the more you peel it, the more you cry. But as we peel that onion, from the business perspective, we believe that a part of what we need to focus on is creating inclusive work cultures. I'll share a story with you. As we're getting on this journey, we're obviously, in working with business, we're also working with, oh, by the way, lots of leaders who happen to have disabilities who work in corporate America, right? And so anecdotally, we hear stories from our members, from people with disabilities who work in corporate America. Maybe somebody's saying, you know what, I worked so hard to get into my company. I don't want to tell them. I don't want to tell them I have a disability because I don't feel safe yet, right? Or an individual who's an attorney and she's blind. She doesn't look blind, whatever that means, so people don't recognize the fact that she's blind. She gets in meetings, really important meetings in her company with senior leadership. And then she goes to the lunchroom, and she says, when I'm in the lunchroom and I'm standing next to these senior leaders, they forget that I can't see them. And so I don't say hi. And so they take it the wrong way. They might think I'm rude. So maybe I get passed over for raises. Maybe I get passed over for the opportunity to advance in my career because there's those social cues, those things that, you know, they forget that I'm blind and I can't see that they're there, and therein lies a challenge. But without further ado, we don't have a lot of time. We really want to engage in a conversation with you today, and it's my great honor to introduce you to Michelle Yin. Michelle is a labor economist and senior researcher at AIR. Michelle?
Thank you very much, Jill, for the introduction. I'm very excited to be here along with my colleague and other panelists to brief everybody on some new results from a recently published article by American Institutes for Research. Again, follow us on Twitter. The title of the report is An Uneven Playing Field, the Lack of Equal Pay for People with Disabilities. It's co-authored by colleagues Dalia Shells, who is also in the audience, and Martin Negra. As we all know, there is a growing interest in preparing adults for college and career readiness across the nation for both people with and without disabilities. The recently passed Workforce and Innovation Opportunity Act, WILWA, actually requires the collaboration between the Department of Labor, Adult Education, and vocational rehabilitation agencies to collaboratively help adults to transition into post-secondary education, and most importantly, to workforce. And WILWA also promotes programs and plans to help people with disabilities to obtain or retain a competitive employment. But historically, people with disabilities fare poorly in both labor market and education. And this table, I don't know if you can see it very well, it used statistics from the 2011 American Community Survey. You can see only about 25% of people with disabilities were actually employed in 2011, and compare that to over 50% of people without disability. What's not showing this figure directly is the majority of people with disability were actually not in the labor force. What that means is actually only about 10% of people with disabilities who were in the labor force were employed, and compare that to over 45% without a disability. That is a huge gap between these two groups. And for people with disabilities who are employed full-time, they usually tend to have lower educational attainment. In this figure, again, using data from 2011, about 30% of people who were full-time employed has a high school degree. And when we're moving up to the educational attainment ladder, most people with disabilities do not have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. There is a rich literature in economics and education that document the negative effects of lower educational attainment and labor participation on earnings for both people with and without disabilities. But what hasn't been studied fully is, for those who were similarly educated, who were also full-time employed, do those with disabilities get paid at the same level as those without disabilities? And that is the focus of this study. We U.S. Census 2011 American Community Survey again, and that was the most recent data available at the time. And we simply compare earnings by disability status, educational attainment, and for each state. And we used the salary gap between these two groups and calculated the lost federal and state income taxes due to this gap. And of course, you probably wonder, okay, is it really because of education that we see this gap? What about other characteristics? What about gender? What about race? What about the age? So we also put this assumption in the regression framework. That is, we want to see if the gap still remains when we control for some other individual characteristics, like age and race, ethnicity, and age. So what we found is alarming. Not only there is a gap, the gap actually widens when you're going up the educational attainment ladder. So again, from this figure, you can see there is about $6,500 difference between people with and without disabilities, for those who only have a high school degree. And for those with a master's degree, people with disabilities make about $20,000 less than those without disability. That is a huge gap. So when we test this assumption in the regression framework, where we control for a lot more characteristics, we see about 37% differences in salaries between these two groups of people. That is, for every single dollar that people without disability earn, the people with disability who are equally educated, who are probably doing exactly the same job, only get 67 cents. Again, that is a huge gap. And the state trends mirror the national trends. And we only show the top 3 states in these slides. And there are some exceptions. There are states for some educational categories, you can see a reverse pattern. People with disabilities actually make more than those without. Those are very interesting and very detailed documented in the report. I'm not going to go through that, but if you're interested, please feel free to read the report. And for those with a high school diploma, we see the greatest gain salary differences in Vermont. And for those with a bachelor's degree, Washington, D.C. actually have the greatest earning gap. And for those with a master's degree, Nevada has almost nearly $40,000 differences in the pay differences, which is amazingly huge to me. And scaling up, if we add up all the individual losses to the national level, it's almost $141 billion. What that means is it's nearly 1% of 2011 GDP. And it's also how much federal government allocated to education in 2014 alone. And with that gap, it's also associated with revenue loss for the government. If people with disabilities were actually paid equally like those people without disabilities, the federal government would have collected over $25 billion in income tax revenues and $6.5 billion in state income taxes. Okay, the remaining questions, obviously, why do we see these gaps and what can we do to close them? Apparently this paper is not equipped to answer the why question. We really want to start out by asking, is there really a gap? And how large is the gap? And we're hoping there will be more researchers and probably practitioners in the field who are interested in this field to help us answer the why question. But also, to answer this question, I want to discuss the limitations of our paper. Number one, the data didn't allow us to control for the type of job or even the industry that people were employed, which is very crucial in this kind of analysis. We know there are people with disabilities who choose jobs that probably require less skills or less education than they actually possess in exchange for better benefits or more flexible working hours, or maybe just a more disability-friendly environment. And so the ability to control for the type of job and the industry that people in will definitely affect the results. And secondly, we didn't have enough data points to break down the analysis by the type of disability, which again, we all know, we can imagine how important that is for this kind of analysis. And we know certain type of disability, people with disabilities face greater challenges in workplace, and it might be harder for them to retain employment, and even harder for them to ask for raise. So the third one is we don't have data from an employer perspective. So it's hard for us to judge why these people were paid less than those without. Is it because employer has to pay higher healthcare costs, so they have to offer a lower pay to offset that cost? or is there any additional costs associated with hiring people with disabilities? Again, those data are crucial, which is also missing in the field. And the next question is a policy discussion. I want to leave that to my panelists and my colleagues who has probably more insights on the policy and practice front than I do. And I'm going to give the podium back to Jill. And here's my contact information. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions, or if you share the same interests like I do. I'd be happy to talk to you, and I'm looking for collaborators, so please contact me if you are interested in this topic. And again, follow us on Twitter.
Well, thank you, Michelle, and very, very insightful information. Again, if you're on Twitter right now, #earningsdisparity. We are moving towards a panel discussion here, and recognizing also that Congressman Van Hollen at some point is going to join us, and at that point we will shift gears. But in the meantime, we're going to move forward with a moderated discussion here. We're joined to my right, Michael Gamble McCormick. Many of you know Michael. He is the Associate Executive Director for Research and Policy at the Association of University Centers on Disability, or AUCD. He also obviously helped draft the Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act, and he was with Senator Harkin's team at the Health Committee. And to my left, we're joined by John Westbrook. John is the manager of the Disability Research to Practice program at CEDL, which is an affiliate of AIR. And then to the left of John, Elizabeth Jennings, who is the Deputy Director at the National Disability Institute. I think we're going to start with Michael, and each of our guests are going to make a few comments, and then we're going to move into a question and answer. So Michael, and then we'll move to John, and then Elizabeth.
You want myself or you want to steer?
Pick your practice. But make sure you use a microphone, whatever you do. How about that?
Can you hear me? You can hear me, right? Okay.
That's
So,
better.
say that again, Kelly.
That's actually better.
Oh, good.
Oh,
Good.
sorry.
Excellent. All right. Good. Wonderful. It's so nice to see everybody here and see some old friends. I actually want to start out by thanking AIR and Michelle and Dwayne and Ida for this work. It's foundational work. It's the type of work that I think policy points toward, and we can say, look, there are clear disparities here. We were talking a little beforehand that sometimes researchers poo-poo descriptive research. This is really critical research, so thank you for getting it done. I'll talk just a tiny bit about some policies, but I want to tell a story about two people real quickly. When I actually used to hire people and supervise them in a different life, I hired many people who had disabilities, and two women that I hired back in the late 90s and early 2000s were Jamie and Terry, both of whom had physical disabilities, both of whom were enrolled in the waiver program in their state, and both of whom had master's degrees. So they fell into that category of people who were better educated, and they desperately wanted to work. And I hired both of them to do full-time work, and both of them came to me after they were hired and said, I want to work full-time, but can you pay me less? And or can you say that I'm working X number of hours and I'll still work the 40 hours? Because their supports were coupled with SSI and with Medicaid. And they were scared to death about not being able to get out of bed in the morning, about not being able to take care of themselves, about not being able to be fed. And that, in and of itself, is a critical policy component. We can't be putting people into that type of situation. So that where their supports, their long-term services and supports that allow them to be in the community, to be able to work, to be part of their communities where they want to be, are coupled with a very low means tested set of policies. So if I think about this work, one of the reasons that we see the disparity is because we have substantial gainful activity limits that are extraordinarily low. They are 30 years out of date. And if I have a specific recommendation, it would be to update those and then link them to the consumer price index increases and make sure that they continue to go up. However, I will also say that the other thing that we can recommend is to really think about the fact that our policies around supports are 1950s policies, when we did not think about individuals working. What we think about, and we are almost 60 years after the fact, and we have assistive technology that is different, we have supports that are different, we have a workforce that is educated in a different way. We have to change that set of policies to presume work and ability, not to presume lack of work and ability. So I'll stop there and we can pass it on. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Really, really important comments and make me think of some of the young leaders that we have in our network who have gone on, graduated from universities with honors, taken positions, and are having to lower their wages in order to stay eligible for that assistance, either that or not work. John.
Good morning. Let me say it's wonderful to see this room so full. At one point when I heard it's going to be snowing, I'm from Texas, by the way. And I came in last night and everybody was saying, oh, it's going to be snowing. You might not even make it. So I got to thinking that this thing could have been snowed out. So I'm very glad that you're all here. And we do have a seat up front here for the people at the back. If you'd like to sit down, there's one seat up here. I do work at a place that's called Disability Research to Practice. It's my part of the organization of SEDL, which, as Jill pointed out, is now an affiliate of AR. And as such, we do a lot of work with NIDER's 300 some odd funded researchers and research projects. And it strikes me that the implications of Michelle's report are quite astounding in terms of the fact that the majority of research tends to get to everything up to the point of employment, as if the point of employment is it. And so all the supports, other kinds of things to facilitate the movement and needs of a person with a disability is up to the door of employment. And assuming that that point in time is everything is then somehow going to take care of itself. We have very little research focusing on after that employment situation occurs, except in the area of some things like supported employment. So it seems to me that this does require an expansion of the focus of research that is supported by the government, because the kinds of inequalities that Michelle is noting are simply unacceptable. I'll also say that I think a part of the problem may be around neglecting to think about a person with a disability moving into a career as opposed to a job. And it's simply ridiculous to think, if you look at your own experiences, can you remember your first job? How many of you are still in your first job? Not many of us are still in our first job. So the ability to move within an employment infrastructure, if you're talking about one business employer, or if you're talking about the wilder professional world, even more of a challenge perhaps to try and determine how to move and to be effective in that movement. So that's one big area. The last one, because we were only supposed to talk 3 minutes, is around the notion of public data. And I think public data is something that could be an immediate move by policymakers to expand. As you probably know, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has only recently begun to report employment and unemployment rates of persons with disabilities. So that's great, that's wonderful. But I think that Michelle's report points out that we need some additional data points that would be public data so that we could monitor and have a sense of some of these issues around inequity and difference between pay. So saying that, I imagine my 3 minutes is over.
Thank you, and we're going to come back and talk about that need for additional research. Elizabeth?
Great, thank you. Thank you to the American Institutes of Research, to AIR's distinguished researchers, my colleagues on the panel, and to each of you for giving me the opportunity to be here with you today. As was mentioned, I'm Elizabeth Jennings with the National Disability Institute. We're the first national nonprofit to focus on the economic advancement of all people with disabilities. So for us, it's not just about employment, it's about a pathway to a better financial future. We really appreciate this report as it offers a new view of the disparity that individuals with disabilities experience and brings to focus for me 3 critical areas to look at: policy, perception, and prosperity. And if you'll indulge me, given the organization I work for, I want to talk about prosperity first. So we did a study at NDI that you have out on the table where we looked at the FINRA, I want to get their name right, Investor Education Foundation's 2012 National Financial Capability Study, which examined the financial capability of all Americans, and we mined the data to look at the greater disparity for Americans with disabilities. But as most of the people with disabilities in that report reported that they were not working, I want to actually share with you what the people who were employed, how they fared in this financial capability study. More than half reported a somewhat to a very difficult time making ends meet monthly. More than half are spending equal to or more than their monthly income. And when asked, have you set aside emergency funds to cover 3 months' expenses, which is a measure of financial fragility, again, more than half reported they had not. And for individuals with disabilities, the answer to that question was no, at a rate of 81%. So the pay gap and the additional cost associated with having a disability are compounded by these challenges that all Americans are facing. Coming up on the 25th anniversary of the ADA, which will take place this July, yay, we're really encouraged because there are new regulations that have come out that are going to positively impact the employment of individuals with disabilities, new opportunities such as career pathways and Section 508. But we would argue and challenge that these new policies must be paired with services that improve individual understanding of budgets, the interplay of public benefits and earned income, as some of my colleagues have mentioned, particularly regarding critically needed health care, and the income needed to cover the gateway cost associated with having a disability in America. The policies we create need to encourage wages at a high level without the risk of forfeiting critically needed health care services that are very often only provided by Medicaid. But I'm also going to challenge you and say that policy isn't enough. Our greater challenge is the perception of people with disabilities and how we're going to change that public perception to show that individuals with disabilities are valued contributors in every marketplace. And it really speaks to the intrinsic worth of all of us. I know that this study looks at the pay gap for people with disabilities, and it's easy to read the report and say, that's about them, that's about another group. But disability is a natural part of life. And so this study is about all of us and how quickly our value to society can change regardless of our education. Thanks. I hope that was 3 minutes.
That was perfect.
I timed it.
And what was really nice is you talked about those 3 Ps of policy, perspective, and prosperity. I had breakfast with one of my board members who this morning talked to me about 3 Ps, and it was people, performance, and profit, but he said that he would add a 4th, and it would be perception. So definitely a connection there. We're going to move into some dialogue at this point, recognizing that the congressman may be joining us at any point. Looking at Diana to make sure I follow the rules. With that, let's talk. I'm going to pose Michael a question, and John and Elizabeth, if you want to jump in, feel free. Oh, and good timing.
All right.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Welcome,
Hi, how are you?
This is gives us a great honor to introduce to you Congressman Ben Holland. He has been a longtime supporter of disability rights, introducing numerous bills, including IDEA Full Funding Act, the IDEA Fairness Restoration Act, and other legislation to specifically benefit and support individuals with disabilities. He also serves as the co-chair of the Congressional Down Syndrome Caucus, and we are so honored to have you with us, Congressman.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jill, for that introduction. Thank all of you for your interest and good work in this area, and to our panelists, thank you for your participation here. Michelle Yin, thank you for the study that you've done that we're going to be talking about, and thanks to the American Institutes of Research for focusing attention and brain power on these important issues. I am pleased, I will say that we're going to be able to introduce shortly the IDEA full funding bill. We're working on that, putting the final touches on. It is a bipartisan piece of legislation. I think all of you in this room know that Congress, having made a commitment so long ago, we've got to find a viable path for meeting that promise. I'm also pleased that the President recently signed the ABLE Act. That was a great bipartisan victory. Thank all of you who helped make that possible, because what it does is, establish the equivalent of the 529 college savings accounts for individuals and families with disabilities to help make the investments that are important and necessary. So let me just say very briefly that I think that the topic you're covering today is really important, which are the wage gaps faced by individuals in the workforce with disabilities. We all know there are lots of success stories, and it's always wonderful when employers hire individuals with disabilities and see their capabilities and their ability to help contribute to those businesses. But we also know that in far too many cases, people are being left behind. We had to address this battle with respect to people being denied access to classrooms. We fought this battle with respect to people being denied access to jobs, and now we got to continue to move on those two fronts, but also address this very real issue of people in jobs where they're not being fairly and fully compensated for what they're contributing to those jobs. And I was especially struck with some of the findings that individuals with equal educational attainment are still falling dramatically far behind when it comes to what they're paid. And so this is a question of fairness, and I look forward to working with all of you to try to address this issue. The Workforce Investment Opportunity Act that was recently passed on a bipartisan basis, the reauthorization, tries to move in this direction, but we need all the push and effort we can get from all of you. And I'll just close by saying I just came from the organizational meeting for the Budget Committee, and as we look at our budgets going forward, which should reflect the values and priorities of the American people, I hope all our colleagues will remind people that we want a full and inclusive society where everybody is able to reach their full potential and given opportunity to demonstrate what they can do and be fairly rewarded for it. So thank you for giving me a few moments. I just want to stop by and thank you for your good work. And as we head off on another Congress, we got a lot more work to do. All right, take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the first question I'm going to address to Michael, and provide John and Elizabeth, if you want to make a comment, feel free. If not, feel free. We'll just kind of go from there. And then we're going to have a few questions, and then we want to engage in dialogue, question and answers with the audience. But Michael, you've spent a lot of time really focused on transition and post-secondary education. And I just am wondering, from your perspective, how can we improve the low rates of transition for this population?
Sure, I feel like I've spent much of my career doing that, but certainly the last 2 years working on the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. And I appreciate Representative Van Hollen mentioned that. It's one of the things that Senator Harkin talked a lot about. He tells a story about Senator Kennedy, and they were in his office one evening talking about opportunities. How do you actually get jobs? How do you get into certain sectors? How do you actually move forward with a career? And Senator Kennedy said to him, well, you know, my kids aren't going to have any problem. Because my kids know everybody. Because of who he was. I mean, you have this social network, you have these connections, you have these webs that you are attached to when you were born in certain places. And as they talked, they said, what happens with individuals with disabilities, particularly in high school, is that they become more and more and more segregated and isolated. And one of the things that doesn't happen in terms of transition is that we don't see individuals moving out into places like getting newspaper delivery jobs, or a clerk, or working in a library, or doing those type of part-time jobs or internships, summer employment, volunteer type of situations, partly because of what Elizabeth was talking about, the perception piece. And one of the things that happened in WEO is we said, we have to make sure that people start getting those opportunities early, at 14, 15, 16 years of age, to make sure that they have this, they start developing this web of connections. Families do this, and you see lots and lots of good families working really hard to do this. But some young people don't have those opportunities. So we want to make sure that schools and vocational rehabilitation agencies are working together to make sure that those opportunities take place for every single young person, so that they start to get those experiences under their belt. And that will actually help increase the transition and movement, not just in, as John was saying, into a job, but actually into a career path going forward. And I'd love to hear what if other folks have things to say about that.
You want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think I just want to add that one of the other challenges that transition age youth face is if you need to hold on to a healthcare benefit, you're going to age out under ACA, and so many people are still going on to the Medicaid rolls, which means that they're having to prove that their disability doesn't allow them to work, and they and their parents are consistently getting the message, don't try to work, because we need you to be eligible at age 18 when you're going to be redetermined. And so if you show that you can work, you're not going to meet the adult definition of disability. And so that definition really creates an expectation that you won't work, and a fear that if you work, you're not going to have the critically needed health care that you need.
I would just add one thing, and that is, you know, as Michael is pointing out, WEOA, I'm saying that right, is I think a great bill as it was revised, because it actually uses some things that we have learned from research activities. One of these is that the most rigorous finding of why kids with disabilities are successful in making the transition into work is the extent to which they have been exposed and actually working in a competitive employment situation during, let's say, their secondary schooling experience. And without that, the rate of success becomes much less. So I think it is very important. It's wonderful that we all supports that, and hopefully that will become more the norm than it is currently.
On the lines of WIOA, do you want to touch on anything, Michael? Does that spawn any thinking about WIOA and how it might face these problems?
I think one of the things that's happening right now is we're seeing regulations develop around WIOA, and Ed and Steve knows this better than anybody probably. The Department of Education and Labor are working on their regulations. One of the things that I'm really happy about is that I'm hearing some of the organizations that Steve represents come to us and say, how do we actually do the transition youth component? And one of the things in WIOA is that 15% of funds need to be spent on transitioning youth. Some states are already doing that and have been doing it for ages. Some are having to figure out how to do that. But that gets specifically to the question that you asked originally, Jill, is that Congress said this is important for the long haul, for making sure that individuals are engaged in work for the long haul. So we really need to pay attention at that level. And I appreciate John pointing out that we actually did look at some of the research to try to do some of the things. Every once in a while we used to do that.
So on the note of research, John, what does research tell us about the success of people with disabilities in the workplace?
Well, it's really a big question. We know a variety of things. You know, one I would point out as kind of a category is something that's usually referred to by researchers as employer or business attitude. And by that I mean their attitude towards people with disabilities as employees in their company, their recognition of productivity of people with disabilities. Everybody's seen studies about many persons with disabilities are very regular in terms of their being at work on time, every day. Those kinds of things are generally the kinds of things that businesses and employers are looking for. However, they have attitudinal kind of disconnect with people with disabilities and those kinds of characteristics. And so I think we still have quite a challenge to deal with those kinds of issues. It depends if we're talking about transition or we're talking about folks that may have experienced a disability as they are older. We have some information about state supports like vocational rehabilitation services. If people with disabilities do avail themselves of those services. Some interesting information about some people with disabilities seemingly don't have as much confidence in state vocational rehabilitation as perhaps they should, and may not be utilizing all of those services as best they could. But for the long term, to benefit from those services of support is usually very meaningful and very effective. So those are a couple of things from research about things that support employment. I'm sure probably everybody has other kinds of thoughts about that, but we have still a lot to learn through research studies. And in fact, issues around how to best support folks once they enter an employment situation, I think is one of those areas in which we must focus more research, and we need a better job in terms of how to deal with the necessary wraparound of services. We need to deal with issues of disincentives and loss of benefits so that employment, which gives most of us in the room a real sense of meaning and purpose, is something that every individual would have. So.
Absolutely well said. There are a lot of disincentives that stand in the way, and yet business represents the demand side of the equation, and they need access to the talent to be able to not only recruit but to retain, right, and to help advance and grow their business. Elizabeth, what would success look like for people with disabilities who are educated and employed like their non-disabled peers?
Sure, that's such a great question. Thank you so much, Jill. So, you know, I'm on a working group right now in my home state of Florida. Some advocates got together and asked for folks to help them better understand how they can go and have a career. And the advocate who came on the line said, I'm somebody who uses Medicaid waiver services. I need personal care attendance every day. I went to college. I want a career. And to me, success would mean that that individual has access to all of those things. That we don't have to look at things like the state's qualified income trust to let her put her earnings into a trust that she can't access herself. So she's allowed to work, she's allowed to earn, but she has to give somebody else ownership of her money and then have it distributed to her, as if she's capable of getting a degree, she's capable of working and contributing to the labor market, but she's not capable of monitoring her own funds. I mean, we have a lot of really great opportunities within policy that make way for people to earn more and save more, but it comes with a price. Often a price of having either to pay in to things like a pooled trust or to sacrifice ownership of your own funds, which shouldn't be acceptable. So success would be new policies that look at functional capability and separate that from ability to work so that people have an opportunity to get the services that they need to be their best and brightest self and contribute to our societal needs. And as you saw in the research, our budgets. So to me, the most outstanding thing in the research is how much we lost as a nation, not just in talent, but in money that could be used to help support and provide the very services that that individual needs to contribute.
Does anybody want to make a comment?
Yeah, Elizabeth and I are going to be buddies all month around this very issue because I think she's hit the nail on the head. Decoupling supports from other benefits, I think, is one of the key policy changes we need to see. Individuals should be supported at the level that they need the support, so that they can do what they want, particularly around employment in society. Linking it to healthcare, linking it to cash benefits, linking into other things makes no sense whatsoever. If somebody needs to get out of bed in the morning, they need to get out of bed. I don't care how much they're making. Maybe we can have a means test that is somewhere around $100,000 or $150,000. But to say that somebody who is making $21,000 can pay for that type of support is crazy. We need to acknowledge the need for long-term services and supports and make sure they are available to everybody in our citizenry.
It seems like there's a perfect storm. Like there's all these things going on. The one thing that we haven't talked about is we've got Section 503, right? From the U.S. Department of Labor, from OFCCP, that's telling federal contractors that they have to establish utilization goals across job groups, that 7% across job groups will be people with disabilities. So if business is a federal contractor, and we know that federal contractors employ 22% of this nation's workforce, if they haven't come to the party, guess what? They're coming to the party. They're coming out of the woodworks, and they're saying, you know, where are the people? And so we've got this storm because the demand is growing, and business, we've got to address those attitudinal barriers. I mean, the ADA gave people with disabilities access, but we can't legislate attitude, right? So we have to come at attitude. One of the best ways to do that is to get business responding to their peers. Look at the work that Walgreens has done. And now how countless companies have come and learned from their practices and are going out there and looking to diversify their workforce to include people with disabilities. So if we've got the demand there, we've got to figure out how to get the supply in the door and equal, right? Or ahead, maybe. But in the spirit of time, we want to open this up to questions and answers. And so I don't know, do we have a microphone or what? Just talking very loud. Yes. Dara.
Hi, I'm Dara Baldwin with National Disability Rights Network. We're the National Organization for the Protection and Advocacy Organizations. I want to say thank you for this. It's very interesting. There's two things. One is connecting this to the other services and other things that people with disability need, which we need to connect our work of employment to housing and transportation. Many times we work on these programs, you can get people the jobs they want. They can't afford to live. You know, we have our AA, which is accessible and affordable. We try to tell HUD. And of course, Department of Transportation, you know, people can't get to the jobs, and it's not just jobs, as you were saying, perception. They want to be part of the community. So work, play, and play, right? So I'll just say that. And then the other part of this, which always gets left out, is the cultural competency. And the data you're putting forward is great, but for communities of color, and especially the Native American communities, these numbers double and triple. And those perceptions of them getting jobs and getting education, we need to include that in this conversation. And I really will hope that some of this data and some of this information will start talking about the Black community, the Latino, the Asian, and the Native American community.
Thank you for always bringing up that important point.
Can I make one comment to Doris' points? In September, Senator Harkin published a report and held a hearing around the intersection of disability and poverty. And 29% of the disabled population are living in poverty. It is twice what the rate of the general population is. It is also the only group that has increased in poverty rate in the last 4 years. It is higher than any other subgroup in the population. So we've got to make sure that those wraparound services, and Jeff mentioned it, and Michelle had alluded to it, that housing and the transportation in particular are the ones that really keep people in a place where they can't move out of poverty. So these services and supports are linked, and I appreciate you bringing up that topic.
Okay, so I saw Steve's hand, I saw Kelly's hand, and then I don't know your name, but I'm going to come to you next, Nisha. Okay, so Steve.
Steve Wooderson of the Council of State Administrators of Vocational Rehab. Thank you for the great report. Plays very well into our world, as you can imagine. Michael, this Congress, what's our focus to try to address this very issue? Where do you see our opportunities to make the greatest impact?
So Dwayne and I were talking before the session started today, and we both said we're optimists. And the definition of an optimist is somebody who is perpetually pleasant and happy, but is always disappointed. But lives with that disappointment and goes forward. I think there are opportunities here, Steve. I really do. I think that the labor and workforce issue is a harder one for this Congress. I would actually even venture to say maybe even harsh is pretty extraordinary. But I think particularly with Senator Murray and Senator Alexander in the Senate, specifically, they have a good working relationship. And I think that some of those, some new policies could come out of their agreement. So I would actually spend time with them. The other place, and you know this very well, is spending time with the Department of Labor, spending time with the Department of Education and RSA around the regulations of implementing Innovation and Opportunity Act, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. That's where the rubber's going to hit the road. And I think that's where really to spend more time than anything.
Thanks.
Okay, Kelly.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. And thanks to AR for the research. I think it's really good, although I think we need to go a little further. And I really want to thank Elizabeth and Michael both for your comments about the definition and the disincentives in work. But frankly, we've been talking about that for decades. Like, this was attempted to fix this in, what was it, 99 when Ticket to Work passed, 15 years ago. But we don't seem to muster up the courage to change the definition. We keep talking about it and what a problem it is, but we don't we don't seem to have the courage to do something about it. So it seems to me like in Congress right now, there's a lot of talk about the SSDI fund going broke and that we have to do some reforms. It seems like it'd be really a good idea to think about this as one of the reforms we put forward. And the research that I'm going to suggest is that one of the reasons this never moves forward is because there's always a huge price tag attached to trying to change the definition, which in fact it would actually reduce the cost to the government, I think. And I think we need some research around that to prove it. So if there's any kind of will to do that, I think it would be a really good idea because Congress is going to ask for that kind of research, and we really need it to move this whole definitional problem forward. So, your thoughts about that?
So, I'm going to say we were handed, as an optimist, we were handed a gift when the House put their limitation on changing SSDI, the trust fund, because it's going to force us to have a conversation about these issues, Kelly. And I would actually use Michelle's data at the back of this report around what is being lost in terms of employment. It's, as Michelle said, there's some limitations around it, but it's a start of saying, look, this is the money we're leaving on the table in terms of both personal wealth and helping to raise people out of poverty, and also the health of the economy of the United States and states themselves. So use this is great. And I would say, Kelly, your group and lots of the other groups that are represented here, get into those House people to put that limitation on and say, this is a way to have this conversation. This is one of the policies that we should be changing.
Nyjah and then Pat.
Well, my name is Nyjah, and I spent about 3 years of my earlier career more on a grassroots level. I started out working for Catholic Charities, and then I moved to Green Door. And we primarily work to support adults with mental illnesses. And we, a lot of times, the purpose of our program was to provide the wraparound services for adults with mental illnesses looking to find work. So if you're looking for maybe more of a qualitative data set, I'd be willing to share those connections with you and also my stories about that. But in Green Door particularly, we worked to follow the model, the Dartmouth supported employment model. And I don't know what other vocational state services are doing, but I do have experience with those as well. And I found that we, as grassroots supported employment advocators, found more success with reaching business owners and helping to change the perception of what it means to have a disability, and that millions and millions of normal-looking people do have mental illnesses and do require things like FMLA to take off from work that can be pretty demanding. And in terms of the benefits, I worked very hard to educate our population that they can work. And these were adults with mental illnesses who were definitely affected by those 1950 legislations, and that they don't feel that it's something they can do. And then when you think about people with maybe physical or developmental disabilities, mental health is an issue that I think should be focused on, because people do lose their confidence. They may have major depression because they can't work, and all of these, objections by society and rejections that they experience. And then I just wanted to get more into the medical component. Maybe about 2 years ago, supported employment was challenged by the Department of Mental Health to develop a service model that would be more medical necessity. What we found is, because Medicaid wanted to begin providing the funds, grants started diminishing for supported employment programs. supported employment needed to somehow word their services differently so that it could be a medical necessity. What was many supported employment services were depleted, they were taken out. This is not a medical necessity, but in all actuality, finding work is a medical necessity for anyone. Anyone who hasn't been diagnosed with a mental illness would tell you not having a job, not having all of these things creates, you know, maybe a mental instability at the time where, you know, it's just, I think we can all agree, just, you know, a difficult situation to be in. So in terms of policy, you know, if we could have something that focused on, you know, providing, it's very difficult, you know, for a grassroots person to write a note saying, you know, this is a medical necessity when we're not always wanting to talk about someone's mental illness, because the idea is that they want to feel more normal, you know, and
Sure.
like, so no one, and it hurts a person's, you know, I'm just trying to say, you know, if you really do need someone with more of a grassroots experience, I'd be more than willing to share my experiences.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Naja.
Jill, can I just add one thing
Yes.
to that? So a little tangential to that, but you know, the research is really critical in this area. I myself am not a researcher per se. I'm really an implementer, like you. I came from the field, but right now the ACA asks that the disability question be asked when research is done. But the way that most researchers are starting to look at the question, it's the 5-part question that the census asks. And I think that people with mental health needs will be left out of the research. Because those 5 questions, go take a look at them when you get back to your offices. They ask things like, do you need help going grocery shopping? And they ask questions that people with mental health needs are not going to answer to the affirmative. And so if we don't start to think about how in research are we going to more effectively capture people along a spectrum of disability, I think that populations like people with mental health needs are going to continue to be left out of the conversation.
So I know it's 10:32 and we're supposed to be done at 10:30, but I did acknowledge you, Pat, and
Yeah,
if you want to
I just-
ask your question.
Well, I just wanted to mention that this is not just a working age poverty disability problem, it's a retirement age disability poverty problem as well. For all the folks that are working age now that don't make enough money to put aside for their retirement, and given the baby boomer blip that we're dealing with in the population, we're going to have some significant long-term services and supports needs for this population, and put people in very vulnerable caregiving situations, you know, 10, 20 years from now. It's even started to happen now. So if we can get people more economically viable during their working age, they're going to be much more economically viable in their retirement.
Absolutely.
And can we just add to that a request that policy no longer counts 401k and retirement funds against asset limits? That would be a very easy thing. You don't have to change a lot. Just don't count 401k and retirement programs against Medicaid and SSI and other needs-based programs.
So on that note, we want to thank you. Our panelists will remain for a few minutes if you have questions looming. But on behalf of AIR, thank you very much for attending today's discussion.